Cal repensar-nos per tal d'avançar en un canvi de civilització, i ho fem com un acte revolucionari. Per això us portem veus de la xarxa d'Uniterra, que exploraran quines savieses estan intentant emergir d'aquesta crisi.
Avui tenim el plaer de conversar amb en David Loy. Ell és practicant i mestre de budisme zen i també autor de diversos llibres que parlen sobre la interacció entre el budisme i la modernitat. Ell és col·laborador d'Uniterra des dels seus inicis i hem tingut la gran sort de poder assistir a diverses de les seves xerrades i conferències que ha fet. I avui estarà aquí amb nosaltres per conversar sobre la saviesa des de la perspectiva budista i també des de la seva experiència amb l'activisme conscient. Ens ajudarà també a clarificar quin és aquell punt cec, que és allò que no estem veient i necessitem veure per canviar la manera de relacionar-nos amb la Terra. Benvingut, David.
Good morning to you, Alba. Thank you for this invitation.
So to start about these reflections about wisdom, I would like to ask you, what is the blind spot that doesn't allow us to change the way we relate to the earth? And therefore, what is the wisdom that is trying to emerge nowadays in this crisis, not just the pandemic crisis, but ecological crisis, systemic crisis?
I really like the way that you connect wisdom with blind spot, because I think that's exactly the problem. The way Buddhism talks, it's not as though the solution to the problems is gaining something new or achieving something, but fundamentally there's a way of thinking, a delusion that we need to see through. And traditionally, something like Buddhism, of course, talks about that on the personal level, right? The idea that I'm separate from you and other people. Perhaps my all-time favorite quotation, it's actually not by a Buddhist, it's by a Indian teacher named Nisargadatta. He put it so well when he said, when I look inside and see that I am nothing, that's wisdom. When I look outside and see that I am everything, that's love. Between these two, my life turns. So, he's really talking that the fundamental problem is separation. The idea that there's a me inside and you and everyone else and the rest of the world is outside. And what's really striking about our situation today is it seems to be exactly the same problem if we think of our species or our global civilization as having a sense of self that feels separate from the rest of the earth, right? I mean, that to me is the fundamental wisdom. That's the fundamental problem. And the wisdom that is starting to emerge is that this is a false sense of separation. Because we feel separate from the earth, because we just think of it as just a place where we happen to be, and we have fantasies about going to Mars or wherever, we feel that we can just use it any way we want and to exploit it, to dig up stuff, to use it as a source of resources, as a dump to dump our trash and pollution into. And because we have this attitude, then we feel that our well-being is really separate from the well-being of the earth. And I think the ecological crisis is basically saying, it's the refutation of that. It's just showing us that it's not true, right? If the earth gets sick, we're going to get sick because we're not separate. And if ecosystems die, they're going to have a huge impact for our own health, for our own well-being, right? So I think this is the really fascinating thing to realize. And also the parallel asks us, can we then maybe benefit from what Buddhism has discovered about how to address how to resolve the individual problem, can that help us understand and respond, to the larger collective one?
Mm-hmm.
On the individual level, Buddhism has these practices, meditation, for example. I mean, one way that I would say it is that Buddhism is about deconstructing and reconstructing our sense of self. Because the problem of separation, another way to say it is that there's a self here that's, separate from the objective or the external world, right? Dogen Keegan, the great Japanese master, put it really well when he said, to study the Buddha way is to study yourself. To study yourself is to forget yourself. To forget yourself is to realize your intimacy with the 10,000 things. So you can say Buddhist practice is not about the self gaining something. It's really about the self letting go of itself so that it can realize its non-duality. And this is actually how Dogen described his own great awakening after it happened. He said, quote, I came to realize that mind is nothing other than rivers and mountains and the great wide earth, the sun and the moon and the stars, which is beautiful, right? It's like his mind isn't in here and there's an external world out there, but he really felt his intimacy with it. Now, that's on the individual level. The collective level, it seems to me, is really, it's the same kind of thing going on. How do we realize our non-duality with the earth? And how do we then integrate that realization in a way that actually affects our lifestyle, how we live on the earth, how we manifest our non-duality? I mean, it's going to come out as a sense of responsibility for the earth. Mm-hmm. And what I think is exciting is I think it's starting to happen. I mean, I think things like Buddhism are maybe playing a small role, but really there's a kind of real generational shift going on simply because so many young people realize that, the situation is very urgent, and the kind of way that we've been living, especially, frankly, capitalism, as a way of being focused on making profit, that really isn't working. It's still, I mean, capitalism, built into capitalism is the idea of using the resources, including human labor, mm-hmm. including capital, using that in order to make profit. And obviously, that's given many of us a very high standard of living, but the other side of it, of course, it means that it always involves treating the earth in this problematic way that I was trying to point to. So one of the things that's happening, I think, is more and more people, especially young people, are realizing that there's a basic problem with our economic system and also our political system. If we're non-dual, think about it. The world now, it's really, politically, it's organized as a bunch of, 200 plus little gods, which are bound and responsible to nothing greater than themselves. They're only limited by the other gods next to them, right? And I think what we're finding now is that this as a political system isn't working either. For example, with the pandemic, the way that the different countries are blaming each other. I mean, I'm speaking to you from the US, and of course, now the US and China are into this tribalist thing, each blaming the other. And nationalism in the form that we find it today is a kind of tribalism that clearly is also part of the problem. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm just kind of meandering on here. Yeah, there's so many things to say, but maybe I should stop and let you...
It's totally right what you're saying. We are not realizing that we are a collective and we must take action in a collective way. No? So this, as you say, this individual awakening must lead to a collective awakening in order to change our relationship to Earth. Otherwise, we will be all in the same path of suffering, which we are. I believe we are already in a path of suffering, every one of us, no, in different levels. And it's very interesting. But could you explain us a little bit about your relationship to conscious activism? Because I found very interesting that you turn your individual path, individual awakening, but you didn't stop there. No, you said that we must take action in order to change things as well. Buddhism, maybe it's more reflective, but you went to action, and that's a very important step, I think.
I think it actually follows quite naturally. You remember that quotation from Nisargadatta? When I look inside and see that I am nothing. I don't know if did I mention that one or not. I use it a lot, so you have to remind me. Okay, if I let go of myself, if I look inside and see that I'm nothing, and then I look outside and see that I am everything, what does it mean to how I actually then live in the world, right? To repeat the quotation, looking inside and seeing that I'm nothing is wisdom. Looking outside and seeing that I'm everything is love, right? Beautiful, the two pillars of the Buddhist path, wisdom and love, or as we say, wisdom and compassion. But it shows the relationship between them, right? Compassion or love, it's not just a feeling. It's a different way of living and being in the world that is implied by that realization of non-separation. Actually, to be quite frank, I think that the Buddha realized this better than the tradition that developed after he died. I mean, if you go back to the earliest teachings as recorded in the Pali Canon, the Buddha was a lot more progressive than a lot of the teachers who came after him. If you look at his attitude toward women, he created a special sangha for women. At that time, the situation of women in India was pretty poor, especially spiritually. They weren't allowed to engage in the rituals and that. Likewise, caste, when you joined the Buddhist order, you lost caste. There's no caste if you're a monk or a nun. Whereas, at that time, India was a very caste-ridden society, similar to now. So that suggests to me, he had a real consciousness about social dukkha. Buddhism is all about dukkha, suffering in the broad sense, but the way it developed, and maybe to some extent why it was so successful, was it focused on individual dukkha, my own suffering due to my own karma, my own mind, and all that. And it tended not to look at the social dukkha created by the economic or the political system. So that's why I think Buddhism developed in the way that it did in Asia. But now that Buddhism has come to the modern world, and not just a modern world, but a world in crisis, a world that seems to be collapsing. We have to ask, dukkha. Well, what dukkha are we talking about? Are we just concerned about our own salvation? Is there a separate salvation here? Or isn't it the case we have to look at dukkha in the broadest sense, the dukkha created by our economic system, by our political system, by our tribalism? And if we try to do that, then I think activism naturally follows. It's not enough. I mean, still, many, many Buddhist practitioners still think that real Buddhist practice is meditation and other activism is a distraction. Leave me alone so I can focus on my own awakening or my own peace of mind. And I think what we're starting to realize slowly but surely is that engagement with the world, engagement with the dukkha of the world, social, economic, ecological, that too is part of our practice. It's how we integrate what we're learning about our non-duality. It's how we integrate it and how we actually live in the world. Otherwise, even though we might be good Buddhists in the sense that we meditate a lot and we have experiences, there's still the kind of delusion of my own awakening is separate from what's going on in the world. And we really need to see through that. So I think the specifics of how we need to be engaged, that'll change a lot according to our situation. But I think Buddhism has a lot to offer about how we can be engaged once we realize how important that is.
I was wondering, do you believe that children are still connected to this earth, to this feeling of being non-duality?
Oh,
And
I think
so if they are, what can we do not to break this way they feel?
very interesting question, because, this whole sense of separation, when babies are born, they don't have that, right? It's something that develops. It's something that develops as we grow up. We learn language. We learn to see the world in the way that other people do. And we learn to live in the world and treat the world and other people and the earth in the way that other people do, right? So as we grow up, we are socialized into experiencing and relating to other people in the world in the same way. So I think what's really important when we realize this is to make sure that children are exposed to something broader than that, different ways. I mean, part of it, maybe the most important part in some ways, is allowing children, making sure they have some connection with the natural world, right? I mean, think how often children grow up in a city. I mean, there are stories of, teenagers going out camping and seeing for the first time stars or the Milky Way. Dude, what's that? I mean, it's funny, but it's also very sad that it's possible to grow up and have this incredible disconnection, which is not healthy. So, I mean, one foundation, I think, would be to make sure that children keep that relationship with nature. As they grow up, that is integrated into their lives in a kind of habitual and a deep way. I think that has to be part of it.
So in that sense, what do you think about living in cities? No, you think we should, is one of the problems perhaps of not being connected to earth as well, or how do you see that?
There's a number of issues here. One of them is population, frankly, and people don't like to talk about it. The truth is, if we ask ourselves, how many people is good for the earth, not just for ourselves, right? We don't want to criticize people. We don't want to tell other people to have fewer kids. That's not the point. But looking at it from the side of the earth, what would be a number of human beings that would make sure that there were plenty of opportunities for other species, right? So the kind of huge megalopolis cities we have now have become a problem, because in order for them to get the resources they need, they have to draw upon and exploit so much of the natural world around them in terms of food and all the other resources. So that's one issue. I mean, I think cities are absolutely wonderful, but they have to have a lighter footprint. The wonderful thing about cities is people living closely together, very creative in terms of culture, how much we can learn from each other. So I think it's important not to get so much caught up in a romantic myth where, cities are bad, being in the country is good. I love being out in the natural world, and it's really important to be able to spend lots of time there, but somehow making that split, that's another duality, that's another sense of separation. Whereas what I think we need to move for is healthier cities in a healthier natural world.
I was doing a Buddhist retreat 8 years ago, for a silence meditation retreat in Thailand. And it was very powerful at the time. I remember having this feeling of not being separate, but it was just a fast thing. But then I also got the feeling of getting lost in the track, somehow I again forget about this. No, being mother especially was like a very hard time. It's still being a hard time, and yeah, sometimes like, oh, what do I need to So I think in that case, action for me individually, it's a very good path.
And, for you as a mother, the important, one of the important, maybe the most important non-dualities is you and your family, you and your children, you and your husband, and loving them and, helping them to be happy and healthy and growing up in a good way. So, I mean, that's huge for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think somehow there's a real danger in thinking that the path is mainly about meditation. I think meditation can give us those important glimpses that you talk about, but the real challenge, the greater one, is integrating that into living in the world in a loving way.
Do you think there is hope for this individual and collective awakening?
This issue of hope is a very interesting one for me, because hope seems to me a very good example of something that we sometimes call dualistic thinking. It's another form of duality, a duality in our thinking, like good, evil is a good example, or big, small. It can be rather dangerous because, for example, if you want to be good, that because good and evil depend upon each other as concepts. What is good, it's not evil. What's evil, it's not good. Often, if we want to be good, we think that means fighting against evil, destroying evil. And we see the world in terms of good and evil people. And then we get in all kinds of problems, you see. So the reason I mention that is I think anyone who is motivated by hope, there's a kind of a danger built in there, because hope also is a dualistic concept in relationship to fear or even despair. So what I'm saying is, if you are motivated by hope, you are going to be shadowed or haunted by despair. I think it's important to recognize things are very bad. At the same time, we don't, they look really bad. At the same time, there's what in Buddhism we talk about as don't know mind. We don't know what's going to happen. Things can change very quickly. So on the Buddhist path, we talk a lot about non-attachment to results. And what that really means, I think, in this case, is it's important for us to do the very best that we can, not knowing if anything we do is going to make any difference whatsoever. You see, there's a sense in which I'm not motivated by hope. I'm doing what I feel I have to do. I don't know what's going to come out of it, There's an American writer, Wendell Berry, who says, we don't have the right to ask, are we going to be successful? The only right we have to ask is, what is the right thing to do? What do we have to do to live, for the earth to allow us to live on it in a healthy way? So, it's all of that is a long way of trying to say, I don't think we should get caught up in hope. We don't know what's possible. In a way, my job, like I said, is to do the best I can. And there comes a point where I don't know what the results of that are going to be. That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Living in the present means feeling pulled, feeling drawn, or to say it another way, what we do should be our gift to the earth. And every real gift, you don't give a gift. I don't give a gift to you, Alba, and then I'm hoping you're going to give me something back. A gift is free. A real gift is free. Here, this is for you. So what I do for the earth, it's not, okay, I'll do this if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to work, right?
It's just something you do for love because you feel you must do it. No, you don't do it for
I feel drawn upon to do it. The earth, and I think the earth at this point is calling upon all of us to live in this new way. And the wonderful thing is, I'm sensing that younger people are feeling this more strongly. So
nice. Thank you. Thank you very much, David, for these wise words and for having this conversation. We hope that everyone at home can continue with this path individually and collectively. And we meet you again when it's possible in Uniterra again.
I would love to do that. In the meantime, maybe you could mention my website, davidloy.org. The kind of thing that we're talking about here, there's a lot more on that if people want to follow up. But also, Uniterra, you're doing wonderful work, so keep it up. I look forward to when there might be another opportunity to join you, one way or another.